There's still a war raging, but I wanted to get an update from Frийдбърg on the food crisis, which he predicted very early. Fertilizer prices are still climbing like crazy. There's been some food rioting in China, which I think is a separate issue. He'll educate us in a minute. Sri Lanka. So what is your theory of what we're going to do from here, Frийдбърg? Because I think we're all waiting for this shoe to drop, and I think you predicted this is something that we would experience into the fall and into next year. So when are we going to actually see these food riots occurring? And then does China's food riots have anything to do with this, or does that have to do with fresh food?
I would put the Chinese food riots as kind of a separate localized supply chain problem related to the lockdowns.
Got it.
But we're definitely, I think I mentioned last week the USDA planting report showing in the US how acreage is being reduced on corn. And we're seeing this around the world where acres are coming out of production or less fertilizer is being used, which means less food's being made. So everything that we predicted, I mean, this is a slow train, a Titanic into the iceberg that we're watching right now. And it's going to continue for 9 to 18 months. So, one of the questions that people are now asking, which I said, would become a really critical next step in this crisis, is how are we going to bridge the gap in calories? Where's the food going to come from? And how are we going to feed nations that are almost entirely dependent on imports that are running out of food or are out of food? So I've mentioned this in the past. The whole world runs on a 90-day food supply, which means roughly 25% of the world's calories are in storage right now. But that's not the case uniformly. So some countries like Tunisia and Somalia, Ethiopia have close to 0 calories in storage. Some countries like the United States are roughly 30-40% of our annual consumed calories are sitting in storage. China is a complete outlier. For years, China has been stockpiling food. And at this point, China has 150% of their annual consumption of food in storage. So they have supplies that if all food production and imports stopped in China, they would be able to feed their population for 1.5 years. That's an incredible supply of food. So as you look around the world to places like Sri Lanka and places like Somalia that are struggling to figure out how are we going to bridge this gap on calories that's about to hit us. Egypt's about 4 months of food, by the way, and Egypt is dwindling. They cannot get the food out of the Black Sea. So China is going to be one of the very few potential solutions for bridging the calorie gap over the next year. And I have a strong prediction and a strong belief that because of that, China will use it to maximal leverage, and we will see over the next year an incredible amount of leverage and power being accumulated by China because of transactions that they're going to start to enter into to bridge the calorie gap around the world. So in the Horn of Africa, for example, there has been this continuous presence of China trying to give themselves a military base, trying to take some influence over local media. And there's been this kind of push and pull with certain populations around whether or not we should kind of embrace China locally. And I think that, for example, the food crisis that we're seeing emerge in Ethiopia, Somalia, Eritrea, Djibouti is going to be resolved by China. And China is going to end up gaining influence, gaining military presence, and establishing a more permanent foothold in the Horn of Africa because of the position that they're in of strength with all these calories and the need in these regions. And that's not just there. Sri Lanka, other parts of Southeast Asia, even Western Africa, Northern Africa, China's going to show up. And they're the only country that can show up. The UN, the World Food Program, they're going to do everything they can to shuffle calories around, change food supplies. But I do think that one of the things that everyone's going to be watching, and it's a slow roll. This isn't going to be some one big deal and everyone wakes up. Over the next year, while the US is, trying to do everything we can to maximally impose sanctions on Russia, China is slowly turning the crank around the world on the influence that they are going to gain because of this food crisis and the absolute, surplus that they have locally and the ability to export that surplus to support needs around the world. And it's not going to be free. It's not going to be cheap. So I thought it was worth highlighting what we're seeing. And I shared a couple of articles with you guys and with Nick, articles that no one is paying attention to. And this isn't some conspiratorial, oh my God, there's some dangerous thing happening. I'm just pointing out one of the things that's happening as we talk about, the great change in power, the shift in power globally that's happening. It is happening in a very significant way this year given the surplus that China has, the dearth that many countries have, and the inability for the US to really adequately respond to the food crisis that's emerging. And so I thought it was worth bringing to everyone's attention. There's a lot of little articles that support this point. I shared them with you guys. You guys can put them in the show notes and put them up on YouTube and whatever. But I think this is going to become a macro trend that we're going to wake up to in 6 to 9 months and be like, whoa, what the heck happened? How did China get so much leverage around the world? And it's starting now.
That's what happens with every war. We go in hot, it's rah, we're all gung ho. And then at some point in time, we're like, wait a second, why do we do that?
Yeah.
And look, there's no shortage of neocons and liberal interventionists who are all saying this war is wonderful for us because it's reunited the American alliance and the Western alliance, and that this war is a good thing for us. Let's keep it going. Let's bleed Russia. Let's topple Putin. Let's destabilize the regime. They're in favor of protracted conflict that I've been, warning against. And what Freiberg is saying is the longer this conflict goes on, the more of these disaster scenarios are going to materialize.
What is your take on how crippled Putin is right now, David, just objectively? And again, you're not a fan of Putin. You're responsible for the war. You've been clear about that. But he just lost his ship. This does not look good for him. It feels like he can't, and he's losing all his tanks. This seems like a crazy
I don't know anything you don't know in terms of, I'm just a consumer of information. But I tend to think that we are overly optimistic in the West. And look, the war has clearly gone very bad for Putin. But this idea that magically we're going to get regime change in Moscow, we're going to get Gorbachev 2.0, that is an objective worth protracting this war for. I tend to think it's going to be a mistake. That's now doesn't mean I support Russia's invasion. I've said it's illegal. It's a crime. It's a violation of international law. It's a humanitarian disaster. But what I've supported is a negotiated peace, a settlement that we try to get as quickly as possible. That is clearly not the administration's position on this. They want to keep this thing going. And, this idea that a long war is good for America's alliances, I would disagree with that because you're already seeing all over the world now, people are starting to object to American policy. You saw it with India. And India is the world's largest democracy. They should be on our side. They definitely should not be on China's side because they have a huge latent tension. But China and India are both de facto on Russia's side on this. Africa and large parts of Latin America.
Well, India would like to have oil. And
they would like to maintain their relationship with Russia, and they did not support the denunciation of Russia. They would like to see this conflict end. Large parts of Africa would like to see it end. Latin America, basically all the victims. If there's a famine in the world in 6 months, like Freiberg is saying, they are all very worried about this. All of them have expressed concern with the American policy, which seems to be to protract this war.
Okay, and Freiberg, you have to go do your talk at Berkeley.